Welcome to Nightfall Sleep Radio. Tonight, we continue our journey with historian E.M. Berens and his 1880 book, The Myths and Legends of Ancient Greece and Rome. If you'd like to hear all the videos from this book, please consider subscribing and save the full audiobook playlist. Tonight, we take a tour through the Olympian divinities, a group of gods known as the Third Dynasty. We will learn about Zeus and his wife Hera, along with Pallas Athena and several other well-known deities. E.M. Berens provides details about their Roman counterparts of each of these gods along the way. So let's get started with the most well-known of the Olympians, the Greek god Zeus. Zeus, the great presiding deity of the universe, the ruler of heaven and earth, was regarded by the Greeks first as the god of all aerial phenomena, secondly as the personification of the laws of nature, thirdly as lord of the state life, and fourthly as the father of gods and men. As the god of aerial phenomena, he could, by shaking his aegis, produce storms, tempests, and intense darkness. At his command, the mighty thunder rolls, the lightning flashes, and the clouds open and pour forth their refreshing streams to fructify the earth. As the personification of the operations of nature, he represents those grand laws of unchanging and harmonious order by which not only the physical, but also the moral world is governed. Hence, he is the god of regulated time, as marked by the changing seasons, and by the regular succession of day and night, in contradistinction to his father Cronus, who represents time absolutely, or in other words, eternity. As the lord of state life, he is the founder of kingly power, the upholder of all institutions connected with the state, and the special friend and patron of princes, whom he guards and assists with his advice and counsel. He protects the assembly of the people, and in fact watches over the welfare of the whole community. As the father of the gods, Zeus sees that each deity performs his or her individual duty, punishes their misdeeds, settles their disputes, and acts toward them on all occasions as their all-knowing counselor and mighty friend. As the father of men, he takes a paternal interest in the actions and well-beings of mortals. He watches over them with tender solicitude, rewarding truth, charity, and uprightness, but severely punishing perjury, cruelty, and want of hospitality. Even the poorest and most forlorn wanderer finds in him a powerful advocate, for he, by a wise and merciful dispensation, ordains that the mighty ones of the earth should succor their distressed and needy brethren. The Greeks believed that the home of this, their mighty and all-powerful deity, was on the top of Mount Olympus, that high and lofty mountain between Thessaly and Macedon, whose summit, wrapped in clouds and mist, was hidden from mortal view. It was supposed that this mysterious region, which even a bird could not reach, extended beyond the clouds, right into ether, the realm of the immortal gods. The poets describe this ethereal atmosphere as bright, glistening, and refreshing, exercising a peculiar gladdening influence over the minds and hearts of those privileged beings permitted to share its delights. Here youth never ages, and the passing years leave no traces on its favored inhabitants. On the cloud-capped summit of Olympus was the palace of Zeus and Hera, of burnished gold, chased silver, and gleaming ivory. Lower down were the homes of the other gods, which, though less commanding in position and size, were yet similar to that of Zeus in design and workmanship, all being the work of the divine artist Hephaestus. Below these were other palaces of silver, ebony, ivory, or burnished brass, where the heroes or demigods resided. As the worship of Zeus formed so important a feature in the religion of the Greeks, his statues were necessarily both numerous and magnificent. He is usually represented as a man of noble and imposing mien, his countenance expressing all of the lofty majesty of the omnipotent ruler of the universe, combined with the gracious yet serious benignity of the father and friend of mankind. He may be recognized by his rich flowing beard and the thick masses of hair which rise straight from the high and intellectual forehead and fall to his shoulders in clustering locks. His nose is large and finely formed, and the slightly opened lips impart an air of sympathetic kindliness which invites confidence. He is always accompanied by an eagle, which either surmounts his scepter or sits at his feet. He generally bears in his uplifted hand a sheaf of thunderbolts, just ready to be hurled, whilst in the other he holds the lightning. His head is frequently encircled with a wreath of oak leaves. The most celebrated statue of the Olympian Zeus was that by the famous Athenian sculptor Phidias, which was 40 feet high and stood at the temple of Zeus at Olympia. It was formed of ivory and gold, and was such a masterpiece of art that it was reckoned among the 7 wonders of the world. It represented the god seated on a throne, holding in his right hand a life-sized image of Nike, the goddess of victory, and in his left a royal scepter surmounted by an eagle. It is said that the great sculptor had concentrated all the marvelous powers of his genius on this sublime conception, and earnestly entreated Zeus to give him decided proof that his labors were approved. An answer to his prayer came through the open roof of the temple in the shape of a flash of lightning, which Phidias interpreted as a sign that the god of heaven was pleased with his work. Zeus was first worshipped in Dodona and Epirus, where at the foot of Mount Tmolus, on the woody shore of Lake Jonina, was his famous oracle, the most ancient in Greece. Here, the voice of the eternal and invisible God was supposed to be heard in the rustling leaves of a giant oak, announcing to mankind the will of heaven and the destiny of mortals, these revelations being interpreted to the people by the priests of Zeus, who were called the Selli. Recent excavations, which have been made to this point, have brought to light the ruins of the ancient temple of Zeus, and also, among other interesting relics, some plates of lead on which are engraved inquiries which were evidently made by certain individuals who consulted the oracle. These little leaden plates speak to us, as it were, in a curiously homely manner of a bygone time in a buried past. One person inquires what god he should apply to for health and fortune. Another asks for advice concerning his child. A third, evidently a shepherd, promises a gift to the oracle should a speculation in sheep turn out successfully. Had these little memorials been of gold instead of lead, they would doubtless have shared the fate of the numerous treasures which adorned this and other temples, and the universal pillage which took place when Greece fell into the hands of the barbarians. Although Dodona was the most ancient of his shrines, the great national seat of the worship of Zeus was at Olympia in Elis, where there was a magnificent temple dedicated to him, containing the famous colossal statue by Phidias described above. Crowds of devout worshippers flocked to this world-renowned fane from all parts of Greece, not only to pay homage to their supreme deity, but also to join the celebrated games which were held there at intervals of every 4 years. The Olympic Games were such a thoroughly national institution that even Greeks who had left their native country made a point of returning on these occasions, if possible, in order to contend with their fellow countrymen in the various athletic sports which took place at these festivals. It will be seen on reflection that in a country like Greece, which contained so many petty states, often at variance with each other, that these national gatherings must have been most valuable as a means of uniting the Greeks in one great bond of brotherhood. And on these festive occasions the whole nation met together, forgetting for a moment all past differences, and uniting in the enjoyment of the same festivities. It will doubtless have been remarked that in the representations of Zeus, he is always accompanied by an eagle. This royal bird was sacred to him, probably from the fact of its being the only creature capable of gazing at the sun without being dazzled, which may have suggested the idea that it was able to contemplate the splendor of divine majesty unshrinkingly. The oak tree, and also the summits of the mountains, were sacred to Zeus. His sacrifices consisted of white bulls, cows, and goats. Zeus had 7 immortal wives, whose names were Metis, Themis, Eurynome, Demeter, Messamene, Leto, and Hera. Metis, his first wife, was one of the Oceanides, or sea nymphs. She was the personification of prudence and wisdom, a convincing proof of which she displayed in her successful administration of the potion which caused Cronus to yield up his children. She was endowed with the gift of prophecy, and foretold to Zeus that one of their children would gain ascendancy over him. In order, therefore, to avert the possibility of the prediction being fulfilled, he swallowed her before any children were born to them. Feeling afterwards violent pains in his head, he sent for Hephaestus and ordered him to open it with an axe. His command was obeyed, and out sprang, with a loud and martial shout, a beautiful being clad in armor from head to foot. This was Athena, goddess of armed resistance and wisdom. Themis was the goddess of love, justice, and order. Eurynome was one of the Oceanides and the mother of the charities or graces. Demeter, the daughter of Cronus and Rhea, was the goddess of agriculture. Mnemosyne, daughter of Uranus and Gaia, was the goddess of memory and the mother of the 9 muses. Leto was the daughter of Crous and Phoebe. She was gifted with wonderful beauty and was tenderly loved by Zeus, but her lot was far from being a happy one, for Hera, being extremely jealous of her, persecuted her with inveterate cruelty and sent the dreadful serpent Python to terrify and torment her whenever she went. But Zeus, who had observed with the deepest compassion her weary wanderings and agonized fears, resolved to create for her some place of refuge, however humble, where she might feel herself safe from the venomous attacks of the serpent. He therefore brought her to Delos, a floating island in the Aegean Sea. which he made stationary by attaching it with chains of adamant to the bottom of the sea. And here she gave birth to her twin children, Apollo and Artemis, two of the most beautiful of the immortals. According to some versions of the story of Leto, Zeus transformed her into a quail in order that she might thus elude the vigilance of Hera. She is said to have resumed her true form when she arrived at the island of Delos. Hera, being the principal wife of Zeus and queen of heaven, a detailed account will be given of her in a special chapter. The union of Zeus with most of his immortal wives, we shall find that in an allegorical meaning is conveyed. His marriage with Metis, who is said to have surpassed both gods and men in knowledge, represents supreme power allied to wisdom and prudence. His union with Themis typifies the bond which exists between divine majesty and justice, law, and order. Eurynome, as the mother of charities or graces, supplied the refining and harmonizing influences of grace and beauty, whilst the marriage of Zeus and Mnemosyne typifies the union of genius with memory. In addition to the 7 immortal wives of Zeus, he was also allied to a number of mortal maidens whom he visited under various disguises, as it was supposed that if he revealed himself in his true form as King of Heaven, the splendor of his glory would cause instant destruction to mortals. The mortal consorts of Zeus have been such a favorite theme with poets, painters, and sculptors that it is necessary to give some account of their individual history. Those best known are Antiope, Leda, Europa, Callisto, Alcmene, Semele, Io, and Danae. Antiope, to whom Zeus appeared under the form of a satyr, was the daughter of Nyctius, king of Thebes. To escape the anger of her father, she fled to Sicyon, where King Epopeus, enraptured with her wonderful beauty, made her his wife without asking her father's consent. This so enraged Nyctius that he declared war against Epopeus in order to compel him to restore Antiope. At his death, which took place before he could succeed with his purpose, Nyctius left his kingdom to his brother Lycus, commanding him at the same time to carry on the war and execute his vengeance. Lycus invaded Sicyon, defeated and killed Epopeus, and brought back Antiope as a prisoner. On the way to Thebes, she gave birth to twin sons, Amphion and Zethus, who by the order of Lycus were at once exposed on Mount Cytherion, and would have perished but for the kindness of a shepherd, who took pity on them and preserved their lives. Antiope was for many years held captive by her uncle Lysis, and compelled to suffer the utmost cruelty at the hands of his wife Dirce. But one day her bonds were miraculously loosened, and she flew for shelter and protection to the humble dwelling of her sons on Mount Cytherion. During the long period of their mother's captivity, the babes had grown into sturdy youths, and as they listened angrily to the story of her wrongs, they became all impatience to avenge them. Setting off at once to Thebes, they succeeded in possessing themselves of the town, and after slaying the cruel Lycus, they bound Dirce by the hair and the horns to a wild bull, which dragged her hither and thither until she expired. Her mangled body was cast into the font near Thebes, which still bears her name. Amphion became king of Thebes in his uncle's stead. He was a friend of the Muses and devoted to music and poetry. His brother Zethus was famous for his skill in archery and was passionately fond of the chase. It is said that when Amphion wished to enclose the town of Thebes with walls and towers, he had but to play a sweet melody on the lyre given to him by Hermes, and the huge stones began to move and obediently fitted themselves together. The punishment of Dirce at the hands of Amphion and Zethus forms the subject of the world-renowned marble group in the museum at Naples, known by the name of the Farnese Bull. In sculpture, Amphion is always represented with a lyre and Zethus with a club. Leda, whose affection Zeus won under the form of a swan, was the daughter of Thestius, king of Aetolia. Her twin sons, Castor and Pollux, were renowned for their tender attachment to each other. They were also famous for their physical accomplishments, Castor being the most expert charioteer of his day, and Pollux the first of the pugilists. Their names appear both on the hunters of the Caledonian boar hunt and the heroes of the Argonautic expedition. The brothers became attached to the daughters of Lycopus, a prince of the Messenians, who had been betrothed by their father to Idas and Lynceus, sons of Aphareus. Having persuaded Leucippus to break his promise, the twins carried off the maidens as their brides. Idas and Lycanus, naturally furious by this proceeding, challenged the Dioscuri to mortal combat, in which Castor perished by the hand of Idas, and Lynceus by that of Pollux. Zeus wished to confer the gift of immortality upon Pollux, but he refused to accept it unless allowed to share it with Castor. Zeus gave the desired permission, and the faithful brothers were both allowed to live, but only on alternate days. The Dioscuri received divine honors throughout Greece and were worshipped with special reverence at Sparta. Europa was the beautiful daughter of Agenor, king of Phoenicia. She was one day gathering flowers with her companions in a meadow near the seashore, when Zeus, charmed by her great beauty and wishing to win her love, transformed himself into a beautiful white bull and trotted quietly up to the princess so as not to alarm her. Surprised at the gentleness of this animal and admiring its beauty as it lay placidly on the grass, she caressed it, crowned it with flowers, and at last playfully seated herself on its back. Hardly had she done so than the disguised god bounded away with his lovely burden and swam across the sea with her to the island of Crete. Europa was the mother of Minos, Aeacus, and Rhadamanthus. Minos, who became king of Crete, was celebrated for his justice and moderation, and after his death he was created one of the judges of the lower world, which office he held in conjunction with his brothers. Callisto, the daughter of Lycon, king of Arcadia, was a huntress in the train of Artemis, devoted to the pleasures of the chase, who had made a vow never to marry. But Zeus, under the form of a huntress goddess, succeeded in obtaining her affections. Hera, being extremely jealous of her, changed her into a bear and caused Artemis, who failed to recognize her attendant under this form, to hunt her in the chase and put an end to her existence. After her death, she was placed by Zeus among the stars as a constellation, under the name of Arctos, or the bear. Alcmene, the daughter of Electron, king of Mycenae, was betrothed to her cousin Amphitryon, but during his absence on a perilous undertaking, Zeus assumed his form and obtained her affections. Heracles, whose world-renowned exploits will be related among the legends, was the son of Alcmene and Zeus. Semele, a beautiful princess, the daughter of Cadmus, king of Phoenicia, was greatly loved by Zeus. Like the unfortunate Callisto, she was hated by Hera with jealous malignity, and the haughty queen of heaven determined to effect her destruction. Disguising herself, therefore, as Bero, Semele's faithful old nurse, she artfully persuaded her to insist upon Zeus visiting her. As he appeared to Hera in all of his power and glory, well knowing that this would cause her instant death. Semele, suspecting no treachery, followed the advice of her supposed nurse, and the next time Zeus came to her, she earnestly entreated him to grant the favor she was about to ask. Zeus swore by the Styx, which was to the gods an irrevocable oath, to accede to her request, whatsoever it might be. Semele, therefore, secure of gaining her petition, begged of Zeus to appear to her in all of his glory and divine power and majesty. As he had sworn to grant whatever she asked of him, he was compelled to comply with her wish. He therefore revealed himself as the mighty Lord of the universe, accompanied by thunder and lightning, and she was instantly consumed in the flames. Io, daughter of Inchius, king of Argos, was a priestess of Hera. She was very beautiful, and Zeus, who was much attached to her, transformed her into a white cow in order to defeat the jealous intrigues of Hera, who, however, was not to be deceived. Aware of the stratagem, she contrived to obtain the animal from Zeus and placed her under the watchful care of a man called Argus Panopes, who fastened her to an olive tree in the grove of Hera. He had 100 eyes, of which, when asleep, he never closed more than 2 at a time, being thus always on the watch. Hera found him extremely useful in keeping guard over Io. Hermes, however, by the command of Zeus, succeeded in putting all his eyes to sleep with the sound of his magic lyre, and then, taking advantage of this helpless condition, slew him. The story goes that in commemoration of the services which Argus had rendered her, Hera placed his eyes on the tail of a peacock as a lasting memorial of her gratitude. Ever fertile in resource, Hera now sent a gadfly to worry and torment the unfortunate Io incessantly, and she wandered all over the world in hopes of escaping from her tormentor. At length she reached Egypt, where she found rest and freedom from the persecutions of her enemy. On the banks of the Nile, she resumed her original form and gave birth to a son called Epaphus, who afterwards became king of Egypt and built the famous city of Memphis. Danae. Zeus appeared to Danae under the form of a shower of gold, and further details concerning her will be found in the legend of Perseus. The Greeks supposed that the divine ruler of the universe occasionally assumed a human form and descended from his celestial abode in order to visit mankind and observe their proceedings, his aim being generally either to punish the guilty or to reward the deserving. On one occasion, Zeus, accompanied by Hermes, made a journey through Phrygia, seeking hospitality and shelter wherever they went. But nowhere did they receive a kindly welcome until they came to the humble cottage of an old man and his wife called Philemon and Bacchus, who entertained them with the greatest kindness, setting before them what frugal fare their humble means permitted, and bidding them welcome with unaffected cordiality. Observing in the course of their simple repast that the wine bowl was miraculously replenished, the aged couple became convinced of the divine nature of their guests. The gods now informed them that on account of its wickedness, their native place was doomed to destruction, and told them to climb the neighboring hill, which overlooked the village where they dwelt. What was their dismay on beholding at their feet, in place of the spot where they had passed so many happy years together, nothing but a watery plain. The only house to be seen was their own little cottage, which suddenly changed itself into a temple before their eyes. Zeus now asked the worthy pair to name any wish they particularly desired, and it should be granted. They accordingly begged that they might serve the gods in the temple below and end life together. Their wish was granted, for after spending the remainder of their lives in the worship of the gods, they both died in the same instant and were transformed by Zeus into trees, remaining forever side by side. Upon another occasion, Zeus, wishing to ascertain for himself the truth of the reports concerning the atrocious wickedness of mankind, made a journey through Arcadia. Being recognized by the Arcadians as King of Heaven, he was received by them with becoming respect and veneration. But Lycaon, their king, who had rendered himself infamous by the gross impiety of himself and his sons, doubted the divinity of Zeus, ridiculed his people for being so easily duped, and according to his custom of killing all strangers who ventured to trust his hospitality, resolved to murder him. Before executing this wicked design, however, he decided to put Zeus to the test, and having killed a boy for the purpose, placed before him a dish containing human flesh. But Zeus was not to be deceived. He beheld the revolting dish with horror and loathing, and angrily upset the table upon which it was placed, turning Lycaon into a wolf, and destroyed all his 50 sons by lightning, except Nicodemus, who was saved by the intervention of Gaia. Jupiter. The Roman Jupiter, who is so frequently confounded with the Greek Zeus, is identical with him only as being the head of the Olympic gods and the presiding deity over life, light, and aerial phenomena. Jupiter is Lord of life in its widest and most comprehensive signification, having absolute power over life and death, in which respect he differed from the Greek Zeus, who was to a certain extent controlled by the all-potent sway of the Moirae, or Fates. Zeus, as we have seen, often condescends to visit mankind, either as a mortal or under various disguises, whereas Jupiter always remains essentially the supreme god of heaven and never appears upon earth. The most celebrated temple of Jupiter was that on the Capitoline Hill in the city of Rome, where he was worshipped under the names Jupiter Optimus Maximus, Capitolinus, and Tarpius. The Romans represented him seated on a throne of ivory, holding in his right hand a sheaf of thunderbolts, and in his left a scepter, whilst an eagle stands beside his throne. Hera. Hera, the oldest daughter of Cronus and Rhea, was born at Samos, or, according to some accounts, at Argos, and was reared by the sea divinities Oceanus and Tethys, who were models of conjugal fidelity. She was the principal wife of Zeus, and as Queen of Heaven participated in the honors paid to him, but her dominion only extended over the air, the lower aerial regions. Hera appears to be the sublime embodiment of strict matronly virtue, and is on that account the protectress of purity and married women. Faultless herself in her fidelity as the wife, she is essentially the type of sanctity of the marriage tie, and holds in abhorrence any violation of its obligations. So strongly was she imbued with this hatred of any immorality, that finding herself so often called upon to punish the failings of both gods and men in this respect, she became jealous, harsh, and vindictive. Her exalted position as the wife of the supreme deity, combined with her extreme beauty, caused her to become exceedingly vain, and she consequently resented with great severity any infringement on her rights as Queen of Heaven, or any apparent slight on her personal appearance. The following story will singly illustrate how ready she was to resent any slight offered to her. At the marriage of the sea nymph Thetis with a mortal called Peleus, all the gods and goddesses were present, except Eris, the goddess of discord. Indignant at not being invited, she determined to cause dissension in the assembly, and for this purpose she threw into the midst of guests a golden apple with the inscription on it, "For the fairest." Now, as all the goddesses were extremely beautiful, each one claimed the apple, but at length, the rest having relinquished their pretensions, the number of candidates was reduced to 3: Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, who agreed to appeal to Paris for a settlement on this delicate question, he being noted for the wisdom he had displayed in his judgment upon several occasions. Paris was the son of Priam, king of Troy, who, ignorant of his noble birth, was at this time feeding his flocks on Mount Ida in Phrygia. Hermes, as messenger of the gods, conducted the 3 rival beauties to the young shepherd, and with breathless anxiety they awaited his decision. Each fair candidate endeavored to secure his favor by the most tempting offers. Hera promised him extensive dominions, Athena marital fame and glory, and Aphrodite the loveliest woman in the world. But whether he really considered Aphrodite the fairest of the 3, or preferred a beautiful wife to fame and power, we cannot tell. All we know is that to her he awarded the golden apple, and she became ever after universally acknowledged as the goddess of beauty. Hera having fully expected that Paris would give her the preference, was so indignant that she never forgave him, and not only persecuted him, but all the family of Priam, whose dreadful sufferings and misfortunes during the Trojan War were attributed to her influence. In fact, she carried her animosity to such an extent that it was often the cause of domestic disagreements between herself and Zeus, who espoused the cause of the Trojans. Among the many stories of these frequent quarrels, there is one connected with Heracles, the favorite son of Zeus, which is as follows. Hera, having raised a storm at sea in order to drive him out of his course, Zeus became so angry that he hung her in the clouds by a golden chain, attached heavy anvils to her feet, and her son Hephaestus tried to release his mother from her humiliating position, for which Zeus threw him out of heaven, and his leg was broken by the fall. Hera, being deeply offended with Zeus, determined to separate herself from him forever, and she accordingly left him and took up her abode in Euboea. Surprised and grieved at this unlooked-for dissension, Zeus resolved to have no means untried to try to win her back again. In this emergency, he consulted Cythereon, king of Plata, who was famed for his great wisdom and subtlety. Cythereon advised him to dress up in an image of bridal attire and place it in a chariot, announcing that this was his Plataea, his future wife. The artifice succeeded. Hera, incensed at the idea of a rival, flew to meet the procession in great anger, and seizing the supposed bride, she furiously attacked her and dragged her off in nuptial attire. Her delight on discovering the deception was so great that a reconciliation took place, and committing the image to flames with joyful laughter, she seated herself in its place and returned to Olympus. Hera was the mother of Ares, Hephaestus, Hebe, and Eileithyia. Ares was the god of war, Hephaestus of fire, Hebe of youth, and Eileithyia presided over the birth of mortals. Hera dearly loved Greece, and indeed always watched over and protected Greek interests, her beloved and favorite cities being Argos, Samos, Sparta, and Mycenae. Her principal temples were at Argos and Samos. From a remote period, she was greatly venerated at Olympia, and her temple there, which stood in the Altis, or sacred grove, was 500 years older than the one of Zeus on the same spot. Some interesting excavations, which are now going on, have brought to light the remains of the ancient edifice, which contains, among other treasures of antiquity, several beautiful statues, the work of famous sculptors of ancient Greece. At first, this temple was built of wood, then of stone, and the one lately discovered was formed of conglomerate of shells. In the Altis, races were run by young maidens in honor of Hera, and the fleetest of foot received in token of her victory an olive wreath and a piece of the flesh of the sacrifices. These races, like the Olympic Games, were celebrated at intervals of 4 years and were called the Herae. A beautiful robe woven by 16 women chosen from the 16 cities of Elis was always offered to Hera on these occasions, and choral songs and sacred dances formed part of the ceremonies. Hera is usually represented seated on a throne, holding a pomegranate in one hand and a scepter surmounted by a cuckoo in the other. She appears as a calm, dignified matron of majestic beauty, robed in a tunic and mantle, her forehead broad and intellectual, her eyes large and fully opened, and her arms dazzlingly white and finely molded. The finest statue of this divinity was that by Polycletus at Argos. Her attributes are the diadem, veil, scepter, and peacock. The first day of every month, a ewe lamb and sow were sacrificed to Hera. The hawk, goose, and more particularly the peacock were sacred to her. Flocks of these beautiful birds generally surround her throne and draw her chariot, Iris, the rainbow, being seated behind her. Her favorite flowers were the dittany, poppy, and lily. Juno, the Roman divinity supposed to be the identical with the Greek Hera, differed from her in the most salient points. For where Hera invariably appears as the haughty, unbending queen of heaven, Juno, on the other hand, is revered and beloved as the type of a matron and housewife. She was worshipped in Rome under various titles, most of which point to her vocation as the protectress of married women. Juno was believed to watch over and guard the life of every woman from her birth to her death. The principal temples dedicated to her were in Rome, one being erected on the Aventine and the other on the Capitoline Hill. She also had a temple on the Arcs, in which she was worshipped as Juno Moneta, or the warning goddess. Adjacent to this shrine was the public mint. On the 1st of March, a grand annual festival called the Matronalia was celebrated in her honor by all the married women of Rome, and this religious institution was accompanied with much solemnity. Thank you for listening to Nightfall Sleep Radio. We hope you've enjoyed this journey with us through the stories of E.M. Berens. Please consider subscribing to hear more soft-spoken stories and sounds to help you drift to sleep. Until we pick up the story next time, sleep well and good night.